I like recording to start with just to grab a little bit of a soundbite, and try and see if I can come up with something humorous at the start. Hello and welcome to episode 47 of Great Things with Great Tech, the podcast highlighting companies doing great things with great technology. My name's Anthony Spiteri, and in this episode, we're talking to a company that was founded to accelerate the adoption of decentralized cloud storage to enable large organizations to seamlessly store files on the Falcoin network, a company that is set to revolutionize the $76 billion cloud storage market by providing an immutable, green, and affordable home for organizational data. That company is Seal Storage. I'm talking to Jacques Swanepoel, CTO at Seal Storage. Welcome to the show, Jacques.
Thank you, Anthony. It's great to be here.
Excellent. So before we dive back into one of my favorite subjects on this podcast being decentralized storage, I just want to remind you all that if you like great things with great tech and would like to feature in future episodes, you can click on the link on the show notes or go to the new website at www.gtwgt.com and register your interest there. Again, please hit the subscribe button on both the YouTube channel and on the podcast platform that you're on. And once again, all the podcast platforms are distributed by anchor.fm. All right, Jacques, and with all that out of the way, I think the first thing what I wanted to do was just get you to give the lowdown on Seal Storage, what you guys do, and then we'll dive into a bit of personal history about yourself. But firstly, tell us, what is Seal Storage?
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. So our CIO, Andrew, actually came up with our company's tagline that really explains a lot with what we're trying to do. And our tagline is, we're looking to accelerate the commercialization of Web3 technologies. So what that really means is, we want to work with enterprise companies and businesses to kind of help them build that bridge. Like, crypto, Web3, it's all new, it's confusing. There's a lot of low-level stuff. How do I use it? How do I interact with it? There's wallets, there's currencies. All these things are complicated. So we're kind of looking at, from an enterprise perspective, how can we build those bridges to help companies, interact with the platform? So that's ultimately our goal at the Seal Storage Technologies.
Okay. And I guess from that point of view, I mean, that's a very broad sort of statement, right? And I think that's a great thing that it is very broad, but laser focused in terms of where I see a lot of the disconnect at the moment with Web3 is, enterprise adoption is obviously not even close to being there, right? Compared to other more mature technologies. So that's a great thing that you're trying to sort of accelerate that Web3 growth. Is part of it education as well as the technology? And we're going to talk about the technology later on and how you guys are partnering with Falcoin and whatnot. But is part of that also just education and making people and enterprises and the people that are in those enterprises aware that Web3 and crypto isn't a dirty word?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So there are actually kind of several kind of key avenues that we're pursuing. So kind of I would business development / education is where we have a whole team within our company where we actually are proactively reaching out to enterprises because they may not even be aware. Like a lot of companies are probably saying, Web3 is in the future, I don't have to worry about it. But the key thing is if you're competing in the marketplace and you want to have an edge, you want to be ahead of everybody else, it's kind of good to understand what technologies are coming and how you can take advantage of it. So yes, we have a whole business development team that's kind of looking at commercializing and reaching out to customers and educating them like, hey, what's the platform? Demystify what it's capable of. What real world business problems are we trying to solve? I know again, Web3 is like just a buzzword, but ultimately what it really means is, if you look at research organizations, climate data is a good example. If you want to go back and especially nowadays with fake news and all these things being altered and changed, like how can I go back and prove that, hey, this thing that I manufactured on this date, on this time, or, this climate data that I received on this date with this value, how can I prove that that's truly the case?
Okay.
And
yes.
The only way to do that is to actually get the information and cryptographically sign it and write it on a blockchain. And then it's there. Anybody publicly can go and verify that, yes, this was written on this date at this time. So that's kind of ultimately kind of what Web3 really means. It's like, how can we get real trust back into the system, right? That's kind of the key thing. I mean, nowadays with like all the central clouds, your data disappears into the cloud and who knows who's using it, how they're monopolizing it, are they changing it? Web 2 was kind of a needed transition to get us to the next phase, but Web3 is going to solve a lot of problems.
Yeah, and Web 2 has obviously been in play for nearly 20 years now, right? When you think about it, I mean, maybe 2005-6 when it really started to kick in, and then obviously through the last, through the GFC, which was that last financial shock before what we just went through. That's when it kind of took off massively, and the face of the web changed a little bit. But you said something pretty sort of pointed there, I think, with regards to Web3, is that, you know, the whole purpose of Web3, as I see it, is trying to make what is the best parts of the internet, the best parts of data, the best parts of technology today, and make it better for people through blockchain and cryptographic technology, right? So I think you've actually hit the nail on the head real early. We could almost stop the podcast now and we just walk away and go, yep, all good. But in terms of Seal Storage itself, so what is the storage component of the company?
So with what we're doing on that side of the business is the one useful thing with Falcoin is you could actually store customers' data on the network. It's not like some networks where you use hard drive capacity in some way to facilitate cryptocurrencies. The unique thing with Falcoin, and some of those do it, but Falcoin has a very unique way of implementing it, where they're one of the few networks where they can actually store customers' data useful on the network as part of the consensus mechanism on the network. So for us, as kind of a commercialization perspective, it kind of meet those two roads where whenever you look at the crypto landscape, you want to kind of figure out what cryptos are going to be around in the future, and which ones are not. And I kind of think back in the .com days where 90% or something of the .coms got wiped out, but out of that we got PayPal and eBay and Amazon, all these good companies that solved real world problems, right?
Yes.
So kind of, when you look at the crypto landscape today, you kind of want to understand there's going to be, probably in the next 2-3 years, there's going to be a lot of wipeout happening. But if you want to understand like who's going to be around in 3 years, well, are they solving a real world problem? Do they have like a useful business case they're trying to solve? Is it like 2 or 3 things that they combined? Which is kind of the case with Falcoins, because you can actually store customers' data and they're actually using that for consensus on the network. And it also has a currency component. So you kind of combine those 3 things, and yes, the network is very useful. So I predict it's going to be around for a very long time.
Yeah, you're very right about the whole consolidation thing, and it's very similar to every industry. Actually, I've talked about this before on a number of different episodes, but and also in different contexts as well. If you look at just technology in general, there's always a boom period where everyone wants to basically clone everybody. If you look at internet providers, dial-up, ADSL, broadband networks, and then you looked at web hosting, there was a ton of those servers. They all consolidated at some time, and Web 2 was no different. We had a ton of Web 2 services, those social networks that popped up, and the winners basically were the ones that end up standing at the end. And basically the ones that won for the majority, not all the time, but the majority of the ones that won at the end were the ones that had that real utility and that real ability to solve real world problems to help us get better with technology. And I think that's exactly what crypto offers today and what blockchain technology offers today. I mean, if you look at the list of the top 100 tokens or altcoins, or even just currencies that are out there, you're right, 75 to 80% of them potentially won't be around in a couple of years, which is scary for a lot of people as well. And people have, because there's obviously 2 elements to this. There's a technology element, but then there's also this other side of crypto, which is a bit strange and out of left center, which is the currency component of it, and the fact that you can actually draw some sort of rewards out of these networks as well. But it's quite right there. In terms of Filecoin, and so you guys are one of the earliest providers on the Filecoin network. Filecoin is from Protocol Labs. I've talked about them before. My decentralized storage podcast that I had, I think it was the end of last year. Filecoin Foundation. It's it's basically a global network of storage providers, and it's all kind of there to drive network adoption on the blockchain. So how's Seal? Where does Seal fit into that ecosystem at the moment?
Yeah, so a good analogy that I can use that's easy for people to understand is think of Protocol Labs as almost like the software vendor providing the technologies and capabilities, and Seal Storage ourselves as a storage provider on the network, kind of like think like an Airbnb type network, where Protocol Labs is providing the technology and infrastructure to run the software, and we're actually like one of the units that's renting out capacity to the network. So kind of very similar to like how Airbnb operates, basically.
Okay, and so is that akin? And I've talked about this in the past. Is if you were to use another analogy with peer-to-peer networking as a way as well, is that another way that you can analogize what you guys are doing there as well in terms of offering some sort of peer-to-peer capability for the Filecoin network?
Yeah, exactly. So with Falcoin, a little bit different from some of the other networks is you can actually at the lowest level specify, what storage provider you specifically want to store your data with. I know some technologies out there just randomly distributes the data globally, and some of your data may end up in countries that you may not want it to be at.
Yep.
With Falcoin at the lowest level, you can actually make deals with specific storage providers where you want to store your data. And of course, the distribution is still there because you make multiple deals with multiple distributors in multiple countries. So you can get your distribution, and of course, the software at the mid-level will kind of handle the distribution for you. But at the lowest level, you can actually specify kind of like a hard drive, like, hey, I want this piece of data to be written to this hard drive. So you can control what hard drive you write your data to. So that's unique on the Falcon.
Yeah, and that data from an enterprise perspective is something that's being written through an application or directly written or a bit of both?
Well, that's kind of exactly one of the things that Seal is doing, is helping enterprises build those APIs and interfaces and bridges so that they can, from however they use their data. Because, writing data directly into Falcoin today is, you need to understand how it works and how to do it.
Yep.
So again, that's kind of part of what Seal does, is to help organizations build those APIs to make it easy for them. Give them an S3 style interface, give them an HTTP interface. It's easy for them to consume.
There you go. And how did you guys get to that point? I mean, you guys were founded in 2021, so obviously very, very new, born in this COVID era, and we'll be talking about the successful companies that have made it in this era in 10 years time. And you guys have a history with traditional vendors. I've seen like what's the list here, like Oracle, Cisco, Seagate. So a lot of those enterprise storage and networking companies and database companies. So maybe how did you guys all come together and actually create Seal Storage? What's your background basically as well?
Yeah, no, that's actually a good point. So my background is actually a very important part of the story of like endorsing the network basically, and kind of explaining how we ended up here. It really kind of tie everything together, right? So yeah, quickly just from the beginning, I was a software engineer for the first half of my career. And then at one point, early 2000s, ended up a company called eVault. We were building disk-to-disk cloud backup technologies. I know you work for Veeam. You're quite familiar with backup technologies. I know Veeam myself very well. And one of the things that eVault basically did is like, how can we optimize sending, minimize the amount of data we have to send across the network, right? And so that, they built a successful business around that. And then Seagate, of course, a hard drive company, so like, hey, these guys are doing disk-to-disk cloud. We're selling hard drives. It seems like a logical conclusion to acquire the company. And in 2007, they actually did. And then so I know like Seagate was going to do like go more channel focused as far as their reseller distribution of business. And I've personally always had a bit of a business at myself, and I decided like, hey, here's a good opportunity to kind of take advantage of the program. I love the technology. There wasn't too many resellers in the Canadian marketplace at that point. So I started some cloud business around reselling the technology. So that's really kind of where I got into the cloud and storage. And I always love storage. So kind of combining my software skill background, my business skill, and then working with storage. So yeah, kind of ran that for a few years. And a couple of years ago, myself and a few friends were sitting around, looking at the marketplace, and crypto is taking off. But proof of work for me personally, I don't find it exciting, but I love storage. That's like, if you look at my career, I've always like been really deep in whether I'm programming in storage or even my computers at home. I always had like high-end storage, SCSI hard drives in my workstation at home, right? So it's always been kind of my passion. And I said, like, if you can take crypto and you combine it with storage, there must be something really fundamentally interesting that you can do with it. And then so kind of the key thing here is, I didn't kind of, look like who was the most noisiest on the network and had like the best, block rewards, or like what's the most mineable coin at the time. I actually went bottoms up from my research, and this is like a really important point.
Mhm.
So I kind of looked at like who's all kind of in the top 100, 200 coins out there. Who's all the like storage-based crypto technologies out there, and started looking each by each. And I'm a really deep technologist, so I dive like right into and for many cases I actually ran it. Like today I still have some storage nodes running in my basement.
Oh yeah,
I actually stood up each node and got it running to see how it works.
So you're getting real hands-on, like seriously
I
hands-on.
get my hands dirty. Yeah, I get my hands dirty. But stand it up, understand it, figure out the tokenomics, what are they doing? And then for me, the key thing is, I mean, some of these technologies work really well, but for me, if I don't want to build a business around it, like how can I commercialize it? That was kind of one of the key things I also looked at in my criteria. And then again, like looking at Protocol Labs, they did that, in 2017, they had a massive ICO. And like the technology they were building, right? So they're the only company to this day that at scale can use proof of space-time at the consensus mechanism. Yeah. And some of the other blockchains out there are still using like erasure coding, basic storage technology as far as distributing and securing the data, which is, it's okay, it secures your data. But if you want to be good at Web3 and you're using storage as your mechanism, like you go all in, right? You got to use it.
So what you're saying there is, what you're saying there is for people that kind of are trying to piece it together is that there's certain technologies which claim to be potentially, more Web3-ish, but effectively just leveraging older technology still, to basically do their thing and still present them as Web3, whereas Falcoin has decided to go straight away, with a Web3 all-in scenario. And that's been the basis of the way that they designed their protocol.
Yeah, exactly. So some of the other technologies I would say is like a Web 2.5, right? Where they have a lot of legacy technologies like erasure coding or something as far as securing the and distributing the data. And then they've sprinkled some crypto on top of it and they say, hey, this is Web 3. But really, when you look under the covers, it's more like 2.5. So, I mean, there are other Web 3 technologies out there. But for me, the key thing was Falcoin. The criteria I was looking for, do they have scale? Absolutely. I mean, today the network is at 17 exabytes.
Okay, yeah, it's pretty big.
And that's like 17,000 terabytes for people, or petabytes. And 17 million terabytes for people that are not familiar with some of those massive terms. So that they do have huge scale. Yes.
And what's consuming that at the moment? And I think I know the answer to this, but what is actually the majority consuming the Filecoin network today?
So the one clever thing that Falcoin did is, in the early days, they realized, capacity has to be built out to the network. And then it gets used by customers. But how do you still actually reward customers or storage providers as they bring that storage online? So they have kind of this, methodology of similar to when you put in a hard drive in your machine, you can't use it right away. You got to like partition it and format it before it's usable, right? In a very similar analogy, Falcoin kind of does the same process where you can commit capacity to the network and then it's available for consumption over time. And as you commit capacity to the network, you can actually start earning block rewards on that capacity. So that kind of really helps storage providers like make the capacity available. It's kind of like, build it and they will come.
Yeah,
it's certainly true in that case.
Right. So what you're saying there with Filecoin at the moment, it's not so much a case of that's total potential, or what would be allocated storage effectively is what that number is, as opposed to consumed storage.
Correct. And then today on the network, I mean, last numbers I've seen, we're kind of getting close to about 100 petabytes of actual storage on the network that's being consumed. And it is accelerating quite a bit. I mean, mainnet only launched slightly less than 2 years ago. Yeah. So it is still early days for the network. But again, like look at the storage growth of like actual usage compared to other networks for real data stored. Falcoin is also the biggest on that metric.
And when you say block rewards, what do you mean by block rewards for the people out there that may be wondering what that actually means?
So that's kind of the methodology with a lot of blockchains. You want to pay the participants on the network to kind of make sure they can make revenue from the capacity they provide on the network. In Bitcoin, for example, if you run your ASIC miner, you get block rewards there, which kind of pays you currency for keeping the miners online and doing consensus on the network. Falcoin is a crypto network by design. It also has, and it's actually using storage as the consensus mechanism, and then also paying storage providers block rewards. And it's based on the amount of capacity that you have on the network.
Yeah, and so in theory as well, from what I understand, is it's a greener way to basically offer something with rewards and cryptographic proof, right? Rather than doing a proof of work or proof of stake or whatever it might be, which takes a lot of compute power, a lot of energy. This is, in theory, a bit more greener. And I know that's one of your plays as well, is to offer that green sort of angle. So is that the angle that kind of makes it the green, or is there something else that, makes it the green element to it?
No, that is exactly it. So as far as greening the technology, that is one of the key things. If you kind of look at like how much power do you spend on running consensus on the network, and kind of look at like a per message level, or this kind of normalize around the message level. Falcoin, for example, is using roughly 1,000 times less power to run a message on the network than say Bitcoin. Yeah. So yeah, we're 1,000 times less energy intensive than Bitcoin. So that's huge.
And how does that, and you might not know this, but I kind of go, well, okay, everyone knows that Bitcoin is almost like the granddaddy. It's a bit old. It's not archaic as such. It was the first blockchain, and it was kind of didn't really realize, what it was going to become right at the start. I don't believe, but all these newer ones have come out and always claim, like look at Solana as an example. It claims, proof of history, and it proves to be very transactionally quick and greener. So how does Filecoin sort of fit or compare to the more, I guess you call them, modern blockchains that are coming out today, that are sort of being designed for efficiency?
Yeah, so at a high level, there's kind of two major types of blockchains out there. There are the ones that are kind of traditional, the proof of work, which we all know, the Bitcoins and Ethereum 1.0, we're all kind of proof of work based. And pretty much everybody now is transitioning to a proof of stake or proof of stake like, or proof of stake hybrid style network, because everybody realizes, look, we got to like minimize the amount of power that we are using, because otherwise, long term, it's just not sustainable. Yeah. And then for me, the unique thing that Falcoin is doing is it's like the consensus mechanism, right? If you really appreciate like Ethereum 2.0 as a good example, their methodology is going to be like a simplistic, you got to stake some ether on the chain, and you stake, and that's how you do consensus on the network. So kind of from the kind of like the holy grail things in cryptocurrency is like, how do you prevent the 51% network attack, right? And it's all about, and that's why it's like kind of hard to do proof of stake out of the gate, because in the early days, it's while the network is small, it's really easy in a proof of stake model to kind of attack the network. And that's kind of why Ethereum went the route they did, starting with proof of work, get scale, and then they can switch to proof of stake because they have scale. For me, like, again, one of the key things with Falcoin was it's really kind of like three things that you combined into consensus. You need to get, so you have to pledge currency with Falcoin to secure data on the network. So they do use currency as part of the staking mechanism. Then it takes roughly about 6 hours to kind of format the partition or seal it, which is where seal technologies come from. You literally, like if you think like in the old days, like lawyers, right? When you had to like get the notary and sign and put a seal stamp on your thing, that's literally where some of the terms come from, right? It's analogies to that. So you take about 6 hours to secure the sector. So that's time that you just, there's no ways that you can cheat that, right? You have to spend the 6 hours to basically format like a 32 gigs worth of sector space on the network. And then once you've sealed the sector, you have to go and store it on hard drive space. So you need currency, you need time, and then you need the hard drive space to actually store it for future proofs. So you really have like three mechanisms that make up consensus. And if you really think about it, it's like, wow, that is like very strong consensus mechanism and highly resistive to any kind of network attack.
All right. So in terms of, let's go back to that, opening up for the enterprise, trying to sort of, get Web3 into the enterprise. So what does it actually mean? What problem are we trying to solve here? And why is it better than Web2?
So with, Web2 is poke the bears a little bit.
That's okay. These questions are supposed to do that. That's it. We're asking the big questions here.
Yeah, I know, like Amazon, for example, they had 4 outages last year. I mean, Facebook
Just 4.
had a
Yeah, I thought.
huge,
Yeah,
well,
you're being kind. You're being kind.
Yeah, I think it's like the major ones, right? That people noticed. Amazon, of course, had their massive outage last year, well, 2 years ago, where even even their key card access couldn't get into the buildings because like all the networking was completely locked out. So the idea, the thing that Web3 is trying to solve is, kind of, you think of like in a storage space, RAID, which is like a disk of in a space of disks, and it's really like independent, right? It's kind of the point. So what Web3 is trying to solve is like, how can we truly make the network resilient against these outages and downtimes? And then again, like, how can we get trust back from customers that we're not, changing the data or losing it or manipulating it in some way?
So on that, so what would be some tangible real life use cases then? If an enterprise approached you, or if you were going in and an enterprise said, "Hey, SEAL guys, come in, talk to me about what you guys can do. I've heard about this Web3 thing. I want to sort of, change the way that we're doing things. I want to think like a futurist. This is the way." What are some examples that I can do? It's early days for the network. So today, kind of a good way to think about the Falcoin network itself, and of course, Seal does some extra stuff. But the Falcoin network itself is kind of analogous to, say, like a cloud Glacier style service, where you have some backup data, archive data, data that you want to make sure you can reference in the future, backup copy, that you want to store in a secure manner. So that's kind of the primary use case for Falcoin in the early days. On the roadmap, there will be kind of more like, content delivery, where you kind of get paid for, retrievals on the fly. That's on the roadmap in the future. And then that's kind of like one of the things that Seal is doing today is kind of building those bridges where customers do need a little bit faster interaction with the network than what Falcoin natively can offer. We provide some additional services on top of Falcoin to, cache or buffer or have a hot tier of data for customers as they need to interact with it. Because Falcoin itself today is kind of more like a Glacier archive style service. Yeah. Okay. So when we talk about that, it's more like, it's not going to be a quickest sort of storage or quickest retrieval, but it is going to be there, and that's kind of what Glacier offers, right? It's lower cost, slower recovery. But this is like, I guess, low cost. You could say slow recovery at the moment, but it's also immutability, and also the proof that it is actually there, and the resiliency is there as well. So I think that's what it offers over and above what, say, Glacier does today.
Exactly. And then over time, some of the faster retrieval services will be implemented on the network. Of course, the big thing as far as like usability on the network goes is, the application vendors, as Web3 gets developed, what fundamentally needs to happen is, it's kind of a popular term out there, is applications have to become what is called cloud native. Which means you really have to kind of re-architect your application to take proper advantage of how technology is working at the moment. So it's just going to take some few years for application vendors to adopt their applications to take advantage.
I hope that we don't end up in a position where we're talking about Web3 native or crypto native. I think, being cloud native, I think, should encompass it all, and as Web3 should be part of that. But I'm horrible for accepting buzzwords usually, and I'm not a big fan of cloud native, though I understand where it comes from. But I'm just kind of, when you said that, I think, oh God, we're going to get to a point where someone's going to say I'm a Web3 native, as an example, which is quite interesting. Hopefully not, but we'll see how we go. So we've nearly been talking for 28 minutes, and we haven't actually mentioned NFTs yet, which is quite interesting in itself. So, you guys have, I guess, being on Filecoin and IPFS and all that kind of stuff, there's an element that is always going to be tied to NFTs. So have you guys done anything around the NFT space? Is there any examples of that? And where do you see NFTs in the future?
Oh, absolutely. That's actually a very good point. So like when NFTs got introduced in the very early days, all you really got was as kind of like you got your smart contract as far as your NFT that you secured, but the actual image or the media file that was sitting behind the NFT For the most part, in the early days, they were stored on traditional cloud storage.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of cases people lost their NFTs, which was a bad situation.
So just think about this. Yeah, let's step back. So this is a thing, this is really interesting. And people hearing this for the first time who have seen NFTs and thought about it and think they're this magical thing. The sort of the magic of them is actually in the blockchain and in the smart contract. But then to start with, that was there, but the image was literally a JPEG file, literally a PNG stored on Amazon S3 or somewhere else, which could have been lost.
As an example.
So you could have, in effect, owned the contract to this image, which disappears, which is actually funny because today I think a lot of people think about NFTs by saying, well, it's an image and I can just copy that image off a screen and isn't it mine now? But that's kind of like the opposite. So it's funny to think in my head that in these early days, and probably still happens today, to be honest, if you're not putting it on IPFS or you're not putting it on somewhere a little bit more resilient, that you could lose your actual image part of the NFT.
Oh, absolutely. And there's a bit of a race going on with the NFT creators or providers that's holding them, custodians, I guess is the right word, kind of transitioning the backend storage to proper, crypto Web3 type storage. And yeah, Falcoin is definitely participating, and Seal Storage is participating in that network. We'll have some announcements ourselves in the near term. We do have some vendors we're working with to directly integrate with their platform so that we can kind of transition all their NFTs onto our storage.
Interesting. There you go. And you guys have had a few other the programs on the website at the moment. If you go to Seal Storage website, there's a couple of projects, was 3 specifically relating to Internet Archive, OpenC, and then Starling. Did you maybe want to talk about those particular projects and how they relate to Seal? Because I think they're quite interesting, because obviously everyone knows about the Internet Archive. Well, a lot of people know about the Internet Archive and why it exists. It's actually a really cool site, the Wayback Machine, I think it was called in the early days, where you could basically go and choose a date and see a website that you built like back in 2003. And for the most part, if they took a scrape of it, you could still kind of browse that website. It's actually quite fascinating. So what are you guys doing with Internet Archive number 1?
So with them, we're helping to, so again, Internet Archive, they are, non-for-profit. And so for them, the challenge is like, how can we, and they have lots of data and they are getting more data, and they want to be able to, over time, like you said, like, how can we go back and prove this information we stored wasn't altered in some way? So again, those kind of 3 things intersecting really well with what we're doing on the network, with the network kind of, with the block rewards helping us sustaining the network. We can basically, because they're a non-for-profit, we can basically donate some storage to them as far as keeping the data online as like for non-for-profit organizations. So that's what we're doing, helping them with. For the Starling project as another good example, that's actually the Showa Foundation working with universities as well, and kind of really looking at historical. We've had some human catastrophes in the past, but the video evidence of that, right? Again, so in the future, at some point, people want to understand like what truly happened, and so what they're doing is they taking all that video evidence and they're storing it on the Falcoin network, and we're one of the active participants on that as well. And of course, we've got the Ukraine situation going on at the moment. I'm sure there's going to be lots more videos coming out of that. And I know the Shaw Foundation is very active working in there as well to get some additional data.
Yeah, and that's combating fake news, isn't it, as well, basically trying to sort of say, well, this particular video was created today, it hasn't been altered. Here's the proof, here's the proof in the blockchain that it hasn't been altered. Here you go. Let's historically bind that video today, and that's it.
Exactly. That's kind of one of the key things of the network. Yeah.
Now, isn't that an amazing and real world example of where blockchain and cryptographic technology comes into play, right? Like so many conversations that you hear out there that I have with general people who aren't, interested in blockchain and crypto for whatever reason. Obviously, a lot of people are interested because of the monetary aspect, financial aspect. Obviously, we're all guilty of that to a certain extent. As technologists, we like to, like you've talked about, like getting your hands dirty and running your nodes. I mean, I've run a few Solana nodes here or there, only on the DevNet though, because it's way too expensive to run in mainnet as an example. But that's the difference though, like between us and then those doubters, which will say, it's all about people just gambling money away, isn't it? It's all fake. It's a bubble. But when we talk about real life examples where we're talking about the Internet Archive, but then more seriously talking about Starling, which is that that USC Australia Foundation with Stanford University, that's real world technology. And that, I think, is one of the best examples that I have come across about where blockchain technology is making a difference.
Yeah, no, exactly. And so again, our company tagline is to help enterprises accelerate the adoption. And we'll have several more news announcements in the near future of real customers that we are onboarding and bringing into the ecosystem. We have a very active business development team. I have insight in all the customers they are talking with, and it's quite exciting, all the organizations they are working with. Especially where there's large amounts of storage, and it's just a challenge for those organizations to store the data cost effectively. But if we can combine blockchain and cryptocurrency and help subsidize some of their costs, it's a really awesome story to say. We're really solving real world problems and helping these organizations securing their data.
Yeah, and just going back to the NFT side of things with OpenC, what's happening there? You guys, obviously, is it more about what we talked about earlier, or is you're just trying to secure the actual image side of it?
Yeah, exactly. So it will be transparent to the NFT holders as far as where the images are stored. We are, it's active projects for us. Most of the development has been done, and we're kind of in the position now to start transitioning the actual NFT data onto the network. That's
awesome. Yeah, okay. Because everyone who's in crypto should know about OpenC as well, being the largest, marketplace for NFTs out there. And again, it's not just dodgy pictures of apes. I know a lot of people that have actually selling their art on there, and it's legitimate artists, making a living by selling their art on OpenC. So again, it might have elements of the dodgy side of crypto and blockchain, but without question, there are fundamentally good things happening on there as well, and you're helping get that going. So I'm really, really happy with that. In terms of, just wanted to finish up now. We've been talking for a while now. We could talk for hours, as I say that on most episodes, but I'm truly intrigued with what you're doing here. So love that you're actually bridging this enterprise world. Just on that, where do you see the enterprise and Web3 coming together the most over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, so businesses, they want to be able to, and again, coming from business world myself and having kind of that business background is really important in this space. It's not, where we've built something and, looking for the problem to solve. It's, we know enterprises have lots of data, especially like backup data, historical
continues
data.
To grow. Yeah, it continues to grow. Harder to manage.
Harder to manage. No, nobody wants to delete anything.
No, and always at risk as well. Always at risk.
Yeah, exactly right. And then now, what's becoming more important is, especially for example, if you look at like the food industry, they got to be able to know, and blockchain in general is actually starting to make a significant impact in enterprises like that, because they need to understand like, hey, this. Meat or vegetables or whatever, if there's like a contaminant, they need to understand like, hey, what facility did it come from? What farm did it come from? So to kind of minimize the amount of recall they basically have to do, it's good to understand if they can truly prove where all this information came from, right? And that's where blockchain today is already making impact in enterprises. And now kind of with Web3, it's going to add in that layer of, how can we help you use your storage more efficiently, and again, make sure that for if it's financial records or anything else that's important to organizations, how can you go back and cryptographically prove what information is true?
Yeah, and I think that I completely get it. I think from the start to the finish, the message has been the same, right? It's how do you get companies, enterprises, to adopt Web3 technology for their own benefit, right? To solve real problems. And we've gone through a couple of examples of those. We've talked about the data issue, and you guys are there to basically enable and help these companies, get to that point quicker. So where can they find, like, obviously, you know, you guys are somewhat stealthy at the moment, I would say, in terms of Seal Storage as a name and as a brand, I suppose. So what would you say to people listening to this as to how to engage with you guys today?
Yeah, no, that is true. We did recently hire some, advertising, marketing people to kind of get the name out of there a little bit more. We have our BD team that's reaching out to customers. The key takeaway for the audience, I would say, is, we do have a growing development team. That's, really, I'm really impressed with the capabilities of the team. And again, the key focus there is like, if you're an enterprise, you've heard Web3, and you don't know how to use the technology, I mean, that's exactly what Seal is for. We have the engineers, we have the skill sets. We are one of the storage providers on the network. We can help you build those bridges and work with you to kind of help you take advantage of coming Web3 technologies.
Awesome. That's a great way to wrap up, I think, and you've wrapped it up beautifully. So let's just finish off by saying, once again, that if you are subscribed or if you're new to the show, you can go to the link in the show notes. I will drop all of the links I have for you guys into the show notes on the gtwgt.com website. You can find me at Anthony Spiteri or at GTWGT podcast, or again, once again, at gtwgt.com. With that, this was a really great insight into, again, real-world applications of Web3 technology. Seal Storage is right there, helping enterprises bridge that gap between Web 2 and Web 3. Thanks, Jacques. Thanks to Seal Storage, and we'll see you next time on Great Things with Great Tech.
Thank you, Anthony. It's a pleasure.
Cheers. All right. Okay, let me just stop that.